Okay, so in this position, black played rook b2, so it's white to play. How should we evaluate this position? This is certainly a very interesting position to try evaluating as well. So glad Nicholas popped in to remind me. I know that I evaluated this position as better for white. All right, so Obama 8 might change says king safety seems about even at first glance. So Obama 8 might change. How do you determine whose king is safer? That's actually something I didn't cover so much at the beginning, but it certainly is important. Like, what method do we use to determine king safety? I think that a good method to use, and the one that I favor, is to just kind of measure in your mind how different the position is from a classic castled king. Material around the king can actually make your king less safe because you have more opportunities to be pinned, skewered, like that. So let's just compare this position with a white castle, all right? Pretend there are pawns on these green squares, all right? That's a classic castled position. This bishop would have to be somewhere else. So that position is generally the safest position you can possibly have, especially with a knight on f3, a rook on f1, maybe a bishop nearby. That's safe. It's almost like the definition of safe. So when you play h3, that makes the king a little less safe. When you play g3, that makes the king a little less safe. Another classic structure is this one, including the bishop. This is the fianchetto structure. This one is safe, but only with the bishop inside, and it has its own unique structural problems. So in this position, this is wildly different from the regular castled king and the fianchetto castled king. So white's king is not safe at all. Black's king is also not very safe. The deviation here is that both sides have moved the f-pawn, so there's a lot of opportunity for attack on the king. All right, Nicholas says that he was also optimistic about his position. Yeah, I think we like to play in maybe a similar way. So I think I would also feel optimistic for black. This rook on b2 is very active, right? So besides us both having unsafe kings, and I think black's king is safer because it's closer to a classic castled structure. This rook on b2 is very active. Black has a pair of bishops, and the position is open. So even if the bishops don't look like they're doing anything, the bishop pair is a long-term advantage. Even if a bishop is poorly placed, like this bishop, there are good things that can happen just because it's the bishop pair in an open position. Eventually, they will find their way. You have to kind of just have faith. At least that's what I'm coming to believe. All right, Atara is saying, can we consider an attack from the g-file? Do you mean white attacking black on the g-file? I think that would be extremely slow, especially since we are already under attack on g2. So it's probably something you could consider really long-term, but that's super slow. Just playing king h1 and rook g1 does not constitute an attack. Also, that's abandoning f4. So you might even lose material in the process. And if the f-pawn is lost, the bishop on h6 will be very active. It won't be such a bad piece anymore. So activity, it's balanced in some ways by the fact that white has this good knight on d5. But I think black is at least a little bit better here. Although I didn't really go over this with the engine. I just think black is better because they have the bishop pair, they have a rook on b2, and I overestimated my chances. And part of that is because I frequently don't evaluate the position in an objective way. I do calculation. I figure out if I can reach a new position by force, and then I evaluate that future position. And I take the evaluation of where I am as the evaluation of that future position, which makes sense, but only if you can actually calculate and find that you're getting something by force. All right, so Obama might change to knight e7, then knight d5, but queen a7 was Nicholas's intention. Yeah, I also looked at queen a7. Does not look so solid because it directly takes advantage of the fact that white has an unsafe king from f4. So I tried to win material here, and I thought I could activate my rook, and this bishop on h6 would never see the light of day. I thought it was over for that bishop. So this is all based on some simple tactics. After pawn takes e5, there's knight f6. And whatever happens here, I guess. Rook takes d8 is pretty bad. Maybe it's better to play pawn takes and lose the bishop after the queen. Maybe try to go for some cheap shots, I don't know. But at any rate, this is not what black would do. This is just a small tactical detail. No one would fall for this. So he played king h8, which I think is quite good. What was I thinking here? I think king h8 was really the only move that I thought that would happen, although I looked at a few options. Some options that are not really worth considering are things like rook takes a2, because it's just not really much in the spirit of the position to play rook takes a2. It loses the initiative, and so white would certainly be able to take over with this kind of plan. You don't need to concretely calculate everything after evaluating the position as one where white needs to play active chess and where black also needs to play active chess. So I played knight e7 and rook takes d6. And I evaluated this position. Let's see if you guys evaluated it the same way I did. So it's black to play, but we're evaluating the whole thing. Is white better or is black better? Yeah, bishop d5 was certainly my intention, Nicholas, with the double attack on the rook, which is why I thought king h8 was better than almost any move. I can see in retrospect why your next move is something you had planned far in advance, because it's hard to decide what to do otherwise. But yeah, it was very fortunate that it worked out for you, because I planned some crazy stuff and it almost worked. Anyway, let's see what everyone else evaluates this as. All right, so Obama Emo Change asked, should this be based solely on the positional details or on calculation? So you should almost never base your evaluation on the calculation. It's more like the other way around. You should evaluate the position, and then you should base your calculation on that. The evaluation should suggest ideas for you to calculate, rather than calculating just random variations this way and that way. After playing chess for a long time, probably you develop a good intuition for what you should calculate, but it's hard to improve beyond that point without practicing evaluating the position. Anyway, that's my opinion as a coach. And that doesn't mean that I don't make the same mistake. It's also difficult in the heat of battle to just stop and be like, let me evaluate this position. And it takes practice. Probably if you start implementing this into your game, you're going to lose some games by losing sight of the places where you would normally just calculate. You might make decisions based on just that. All right, so it's interesting that Nicholas says this is a Silman philosophy. I actually disagree almost wholesale with everything that Silman has to say about chess. I also don't like the way that he suggests you evaluate a position. I think it's important to consider just some basic factors. And I actually really like the methods that are described in Imagination in Chess, which until recently was out of print. It's by, I think, Pata Gaprindashvili. It's a very good book. And it's a book that's, I guess, about calculation. But the way that he describes the search for ideas informs my my beliefs about how you evaluate a position. Okay, so any suggestions here? Although this position is quite wild. I heavily evaluated the extra pawn as a boon for white. I thought the rook on d6 was active. I was thinking only of queen a7, but that's not an evaluation, right? All right, let's see. How would I evaluate this now in retrospect? So I have a material bonus. I have 5 pawns against 4 pawns. However, this should seem inconsequential because there's a rook on b2. That's an extremely active piece. I have some pressure on the king. It's true. But they also have pressure on my king, and it's objectively greater pressure. This is just a very well placed rook. This is almost the sole reason that the position is better. Also, black still has a pair of bishops in an equal position. And this knight is not very well placed. It will be when it reaches d5, but we'll see if it even reaches. In the game, black played bishop takes f4. And this highlights the problems in white's position. So the bishop pair is very active. So that bishop was actually exerting pressure on f4. The rook on b2 is not going anywhere. That's kind of a long-term greater activity for black. And because of the activity of their queen and the relative poor coordination of white's pieces, now there's a tactic where all these pieces are hanging. I found a nice resource here, which I only spotted it after I had to calculate the consequences of bishop f4 since I missed it during the game. I didn't even consider it as a move. But this resource, it almost allowed me to save the game, and I lost against our friend Nicholas. I played queen a7, rook h4, so king g8 is the only move, and bishop d5. Now here, the only move is queen takes d5, because if you play a move like bishop e6, you have to give the queen anyway. And if you play rook f7, there's mate. So this was a nice resource. However, it was not sufficient. The evaluation of this new position is better for black. This one really active rook remains. And that kind of just sealed the deal. Yeah, black does have to be better here. I mean, have to be careful here. But that's just chess, right? You have to be careful when you show up at the chessboard. But bishop against knight, it's good. Extremely active rook. I really believe in black's position, and I was disappointed to lose this game. However, I did find it extremely interesting and informative. I can't unsee a move like bishop takes f4. Okay, so